bit about the Eastern Box turtle biology and ecology, and I'm going to start out, at some of the basics, just in case we have any kids on tonight. And then I'm going to talk a bit about the status of the species, particularly in the Northeast U.S. And then I'll go into regional conservation efforts that I've been involved in for this species, and then give you some information about what you can do to help as well. So we'll start out, what is a turtle, right? So they're reptiles. They, let's see. So you can see, I'm going to turn the pointer on if I can find, let's see. How do I do that? Pointer options. There we go. Okay, so reptiles. So they have scales, right? So you can kind of see these little plates on their skin. They're the scales, and then also on the shell they have these individual plates that you see here, and those are modified scales. So clearly reptile. They have their body encased in this hard shell. That's an integral part of their body. So they can't come out of the shell. Their rib cage, the shell is an extension of the rib cage, and you can see that the spine is actually connected to the shell as well. Turtles have I think I've got it now. For some reason, my scroll wasn't working to change the slides. Okay, so turtles, were around 230 million years ago. And so they were here during the Triassic period. They were walking with the dinosaurs. And, really think about that. They've been around so long, and yet 50% of turtles globally are vulnerable to extinction. So it's only recently where they're really being met with challenges that go beyond what their evolution has designed them for. And a large part of that, of course, is human cost. And then also, when you think about Maryland, that's also true. So we have here in Maryland 14 freshwater turtle species. 7 of them are considered species of conservation need. So 50% of our freshwater turtles right here also, in trouble. And a lot of the species in Maryland are semi-aquatic or aquatic. And by semi-aquatic, I mean like wood turtle. They really rely on riverine habitat for overwintering, but then they'll come out in the spring and they'll start using the upland habitat. Some of them will stay by the stream all year round, but a large number of them will move away, pretty far away from the stream habitat, and they'll be on land most of the rest of the active season. But the only truly upland species, freshwater turtle species here in Maryland, is the Eastern box turtle. So it's very unique in that respect. Yeah. Let's see. Oh, and I should point out, let me just point out quickly, you think about like aquatic species versus land species, right? So you look at this leg, and it's really kind of more like an elephant's leg. It's very flat on the bottom. It's small. It doesn't have webbing between the toes. It's, not flipper-like. It doesn't do well, swimming. So it's really made for land. And then in terms of the identification, so, you think of an adult, it's got these yellow blotches. You've probably all noticed. They have some yellow and orangish pattern on their neck and their legs. But as hatchlings, or this is actually a yearling, they actually look pretty different. You might not know it was an Eastern box turtle. But one of the key characteristics you can look for are these 3 to 5, depending how obvious these other 2 are. But you almost always notice these 3 yellow knobs on what we call the keel, so the midline of the carapace, which is the top shell of a turtle. And then the juvenile, so this is about a 6 or 7 year old, sort of look in between. They're starting to get those blotches, starting to get more yellow pattern, but still not clearly an eastern box turtle for those that aren't used to seeing the young ones. So here you can see there's a lot of variation in the pattern, even within a population. So one individual is going to look very different from another often. And, they can range anything from being very dark to, with only a few yellow spots to being very yellow with a lot of pattern. So the eastern box turtle range, just wanted to quickly go over this. So they're present from northern, near New England, so Massachusetts, New Hampshire, runs through the southern tip of New York and along the Great Lakes area. It ranges down to Florida, over to Texas and Oklahoma. So it's got a pretty big range, but there are 4 subspecies. And so you have the Florida box turtle down here, you have the Gulf Coast box turtle here, and then the 3-toed box turtle, which are all subspecies. Here in the Northeast and in Maryland, we have what they call the woodland box turtle, Terrapina carolina. So what are their habitat needs? We know for sure, they're sort of a generalist in terms of habitat, but there are some habitats that they really require for overwintering in particular and nesting. And so for overwintering habitat, they need the deciduous forest or mixed deciduous coniferous forest. And part of the reasoning of that is that leaf litter death. We think that helps to insulate them, as well as the pine needles are a bit cause acidity, raise the acidity in the soil. And we think that may be an issue for them. We don't know for sure. But clearly they seem to choose these areas with leaf litter duff and more deciduous trees. And then for nesting, they need open canopy areas, so field habitat, basically, so that the nest has sun exposure throughout the day to incubate the eggs. Yeah, so these are 2 examples of nesting habitat. There's an eastern box turtle. This was around nesting season, so I'm sure she was scoping things out. And then this is an eastern box turtle just coming out of its overwintering spot. So they overwinter down in the soil under the leaf litter, sometimes in root mass, like a stump that was left. They might burrow down inside the old root system, or in old mammal burrows or something. So down in the bottom left here, you can see the activity period. So in blue, this is so November through March, they're overwintering. So they're mostly underground. Then in April, they start popping up, becoming more active. In June, that's their peak nesting season. And then July through September, you have the eggs incubating before they hatch sometime in September, early October. And so through this period, so in the winter, like I mentioned, they use, mainly forested habitats. During the active season, then as soon as they come out in the spring, they start heading to areas where they can get some sun exposure. And so think about that, there are cold-blooded species. They need the sun exposure to help thermoregulate their body temperature. And so they immediately want to, come out, go find some sunny spot, get their system up and moving again, so they can start to eat in the spring. So they'll have to come to like the forest edge where it meets a field or something like that. The other kind of habitat that they like, are shallow wetlands. So not where they're swimming, but they can go and soak and, take a drink and hydrate. So like the edges of a vernal pool or a wet meadow, something like that. So they'll often use those, particularly the females will hydrate before they nest because they need the liquid. They when they lay their eggs, they actually dump a little liquid to help them dig. So they'll often hydrate right before nesting, and they'll either seek the woods or a wetland often during the hottest parts of the year, so July, August. And that again just helps them with thermoregulation. They can dip in the water, get a little cooler when they need to, come back out, find a sunny spot, get warmer. Yeah, so that's the basics of their habitat use. Then in terms of movement ecology, so I'm mainly going to be focusing all my information on the Northeast, so data from the Northeast. And, while this is, again, a fairly common species as we think of it, there's relatively little data out there. Few research has been done. So right now we have 5 studies that we can go on based on in this region. And there's a lot of variation, again, with their home range size. So you can see even within the Massachusetts populations that were tracked, it ranges from 1.2 to, over 300 acres for one home range, an individual's home range. But here, in the, say New York, West Virginia, so in our area, it's common to be like 5 to 20 acres for home range. And these pictures, just to give you an idea, most of you have probably seen that how people track animals, but we attach a radio transmitter. You can see on the shell here in the bottom left on your image. There's a transmitter with an antenna that comes off, and it was put on there with bioacrylic, so dental acrylic. Some people use epoxy and yeah, so, and then you can use an antenna, like you see here in this picture, and a radio receiver to pick up the signal and figure out where they are and get locations on them, whatever, 2 or 3 times a week. So life history characteristics. Lifespan is they live a long time. So as long as us, 50 to 100 years. Actually, there's at least a handful of records over 100, up to about 130. And there's, they were still alive and moving, so who knows? Delayed sexual maturity. So they're, relatively old when they start to lay their eggs for the first time when they're adults. So they have to live at least that long, even to just start to have a chance to replace themselves in the population. The annual reproductiveness may increase with age, so those older females are really important. And then we see like really high nest mortality at many sites, not all sites, but many sites. And you typically think of the mesopredators, the raccoons, the foxes, right? And they often are the culprits, but here you can see plant roots can actually be a predator as well. So they infiltrate the eggs and absorb the nutrients. So, and then high hatchling mortality as well. So this is a table that shows information or studies on population densities. And so again, it really varies from population to population. Can be less than a turtle per acre to 132 turtles per acre. I think that high end's very rare based on my experience. But yeah, again, here in Maryland, we have sites that range from 31 turtles per acre to 132. So I also just wanted to add a few notes about their behavior. So they developed this mental map of their habitat and their home range and where to find things when. And so, they know where the berries are in bloom and when. They know when other individuals are going to be in certain locations. You'll often see the same turtles near each other the same time of year after year. So it's really important. I mean, you think about this, like if you lived in an area, you didn't have a car, you don't have vehicles, you have to learn where the grocery store is, you have to learn where your house is. It's really hard for them if you pick them up and they move them 2 states over and put them somewhere. They don't know where they are, they don't know where to find things. So it takes them a long time to sort of figure it out again. And a lot of their personal sources go into that. So it makes them more vulnerable. So, making sure we keep them where they are is important. And you can see here on the right, this turtle, how resourceful they are. Right after a rain, it knows where to go to find a puddle to go, hydrate. In these other pictures, they're, hunkered down in what we call form. So it's when they really tuck themselves into the earth. And they found a nice spot. It's the right temperature and they just want to stay there for a while. So they hide. This one is actually under some tree debris. So it's really well hidden. All right, so we're going to move on to population status now. This is a slightly outdated map, but you can see that, here in the Northeast, many of the states consider it to be vulnerable. It's on the IUCN list, so that's the International Union of Conservation of Nature. So they regulate like trade of species. They consider it to be a vulnerable species, and it's considered vulnerable and perilled in Pennsylvania, New York, Massachusetts, Maine, New Hampshire. And like I said, the map's a little outdated, so it's actually also listed as vulnerable in New Jersey and Connecticut now. So almost the whole way down to Maryland. Okay, so this table shows, again, studies that have been done to look at population status. And there are actually even a couple that have been done in Maryland, at populations in Maryland. And many of them are showing declines in the populations. And it's not always clear why. Like some of these sites are, pretty intact, nice habitat. And, they're not seeing disease. So it's not immediately obvious why the population's in decline. Could be, sort of death by 1,000 cuts, right? We know there are a lot of problems, and I'll go into that later. Okay, so threats. So we know there's habitat loss, fragmentation, and degradation due to primarily development. So residential development, commercial, industrial. So often we want to build in upland habitats, and that's where the eastern box turtle is. So there's often conflict there. And then roads, obviously, intersect the habitat, make it harder for them to get to their resources and put them in a vulnerable situation where they have to cross roads to get to those resources they're used to getting to, which then, can put them in contact with vehicles. And then, of course, there are various types of anthropogenic land use, other types, such as agricultural fields where, there's heavy equipment driving through them, fire. So there's prescribed fires, sometimes wildfires, although not so much in the Northeast, but prescribed fires is becoming a readily used tool for managing habitat. And there's a lot of benefits to it, but it also can cause conflicts with the eastern box turtle at particular times of the year. And then timber harvest. Also, you have sometimes heavy equipment in these areas. You're felling large trees that are coming down in the forest. Predation, of course, is an issue. So, again, raccoons are a huge issue, but lots of other species, pretty much anything that can get into the shell or get a hold of the head, is a predator. Parasitism. So there's a few sites. We don't know of many at this point, but there are a couple sites where they're having a problem with flesh flies with eastern box turtles. And then also mosquitoes, of course, carry viruses. Collection is an issue. So both incidental, so people, not knowing better and picking one up, taking it home, moving it somewhere else, whatever. But also there's the illegal trade is a problem for the species. Disease and health. So there are a number of diseases specific for eastern box turtle. Many of them aren't particularly problematic, but there's ranavirus, which is a major virus. It's very, very virulent, and it goes through the population fast. It affects them very badly. Like most of them will die within 2 weeks time. So it's a nasty one, and it's out there, and we're hoping to, keep it contained. Recreation. So things like, ATVs can be an issue, disturbing females while they're trying to nest in these open canopy areas. And then they can destroy nests after they've been laid, for example. Climate change is a bit more of a mystery. We're still not exactly sure how climate change might be affecting some of these species, especially the eastern box turtle. But what we can say is, we've had more severe storms, especially during summer months, spring, summer months. So like after they've laid their nests, you could have, a very severe storm that inundates the nest with water for too long, and the eggs will drown, right? So I think that's a concern. There's also the issue with them, they have, they have so temperature dependent sex determination, sorry. So that means that the temperature depends, so colder temperatures will produce males, warmer temperatures will produce females. And so as the temperatures warm up, it's possible that the turtles are used to going to the same location to nest year after year. They're creatures of habit. And so they may still be nesting in the same areas, but they're now being, hotter for longer periods of time. And you could end up with a skewed sex ratio. All right, so now let's move on to some of the regional conservation efforts that have been going on. So again, this is really, I'm talking about the Northeast region. So we've developed a conservation plan for the eastern box turtle, which has included development of a framework for a conservation area network. So what I mean by that is development of a framework for identifying, areas that are intact that we think will sustain populations over the long term. So trying to focus our energies on those areas and coming up with some action plan, so actionable items that we can do at those locations to help secure them, long term. We also develop best management practices, trying to reduce those threats, trying to give guidance on how to minimize impacts to eastern box turtle during certain activities. So I just want to mention also these state wildlife grants, because these have been really, really instrumental in our recent efforts to do good conservation work on a larger scale. particularly for amphibians and reptiles, because there are very few funding sources to be able to do conservation work with those species right now. And so these state wildlife grants, what they involve is all of the states were tasked with developing a wildlife action plan. So here to the right, you can see the front cover of the action plan for Maryland. And with those, then what happens is there's this pot of money called the state wildlife grant money. And there's different levels of it, which I'll talk about, but there's the state-specific state wildlife grants, which is, it's allotted basically based on the size of the state and the populace. And so there's a certain amount of money that's available for that state. They just have to apply to use it. But they have to also have their wildlife action plan that outlines like what species they think are in conservation need and what actions they think are important for that particular species. And then they can apply for funding to do that work. Then there's also this competitive pot of money. So it's nationally competitive, and it's, you know, you come up with your own project and you put in a proposal, and it's ranked on various criteria. And some of that criteria has to do with, you know, trying to encourage multi-state projects. So we know species don't abide by state borders, right? So trying to do broader scale projects that help standardize methodologies across states. And so you compare your data from one state to another and across the whole region. So that's kind of the idea is with those. And then in the Northeast, all of the Northeast states had agreed to put a portion of their state-specific wildlife grant money into a pot of money that's competitive to apply for within the Northeast region. So those are the primary sources of funding that has helped to, you know, helped us do this work as well as similar work with other species. Okay, so back to the conservation plan. So the goal is to support the persistence and adaptive I can't talk tonight, capacity of eastern box turtle in the Northeast US. And yeah, then we developed that conservation area network and the action plan. Okay, so the conservation area network, I just want to, it's going to be very brief, but I just want to give you sort of a broad idea of what this is. So you have these like what we're calling core areas. And so those are habitat patches that we think can support the eastern box turtle long term. And then we have these landscape areas that include multiple core areas. So think of it as like multiple populations where you have dispersal from one population to another. So that's a rare event, that dispersal event, but it's important. And so just trying to keep that that ability for movement between populations in some areas. So here you have the core area, you have the landscapes. We also broke them into 2 tiers. So there's a top tier and a second tier. And that the idea of that is just, you know, you can't work everywhere. So how do we prioritize to, you know, try to focus our energy on the best of the best first and then work our way down. And so the prioritization process, what went into that is thinking about the size of the site, how fragmented is it, what's the abundance and quality of the habitat, landscape integrity. Also, if you have any population information, how many individuals do you have there? Landscape population information, all of that was considered and went into our prioritization process. I don't know where those squiggles came from. I don't think I can get rid of them. Okay, so let's go into the objectives. So we want to increase collaboration at multiple sites, address data deficiencies, implement an adaptive framework, so being able to, change our plans as new data comes in. Strategic and experimental research, we need to more of that. Combat the illegal trade and reduce threats within these local core areas. And I'm going to go into each one of these a bit to give you some context. So, obviously increasing collaboration is very beneficial at all levels. So local, regional, range-wide, just being able to share information, globally, range-wide, being able to identify some emerging issues quickly. So it might be happening in one state, but not in all the other states. And so just sharing that information so others can have it on their radar. And just allowing opportunities to share resources. So data deficiencies, being able to track observational data at the state level. A lot of states do have amphibian and reptile atlases where they allow citizen scientists to send in information about observations. But not all of them do. And right now, and some of those efforts are periodic. So they might occur for 1 or 2 years, and then there's a long period where, nobody's collecting data. So ideally, we get the states to collect data on a more regular basis. Doing population monitoring, trying to get more information about how these populations are doing, why they're doing poorly in certain areas and not in other, doing well in others. Range-wide citizen science projects can be very beneficial. More genetic sampling. So there have been a few genetic studies, but it's still, our data is pretty sparse. Identifying and tracking disease. And then, so the next thing is to implement an adaptive framework. And again, that's just, thinking about these documents being live documents. We want to keep updating them as we get new data and new information. And that goes for the conservation area networks as well. Right now, our observation of data is not as robust as we'd like it to be to choose these conservation areas. So that's our step one, trying to get that data where we feel comfortable with the locations we've chosen. And then just modifying as we go, as we learn more, as we, have a better understanding of what's needed. And then we need strategic and experimental research. And so what goes into that is thinking again about population estimates, long-term data trends, thinking about land use and landscape ecology, getting more information on vital rates and their viability, and effects of conservation-oriented management practices. And then again, just needing more data on genetics and more research on illegal trade. Like, what do we do exactly to try and reduce the demand or, help on either end of that spectrum to reduce illegal collection. And climate change, again, we don't have a good understanding of all that might happen due to climate change. Okay, so a little more detail on the illegal trade. So here you can see this was an actual confiscation in recent years. We've seen more confiscations and more eastern box turtles in the illegal trade in recent years. So it's becoming a big concern at the moment. And so there was this group that formed, not just for the eastern box turtle, but for freshwater turtles in general. It's called the Collaborative to Combat the Illegal Trade in Turtles, so CCITT. And they've been doing great work. improving regulatory guidelines. So right now, we've gotten better at trying to standardize regulations across states, especially in the Northeast, but that's always a problem, because then it allows for loopholes and ways for people to work around it, around the regulations if it's not the same from one state to another. Coordination and education within the judicial system. So, you can imagine these judges might be hearing murder cases, and then you hear this case about turtle confiscation, and it, doesn't seem like it rises, to the same level. And so how do we, we're just trying to think of ways to make sure that the punishments are, equivalent to the resource that's lost. And so we're, trying to come up with ways to value an eastern box turtle, for example, and what it means to replace it in the population once it's gone. And so having those resources available for attorneys is very helpful. So working on that. Law enforcement education and protocols, just trying to get them up to speed. What's sometimes, they've got a lot they're dealing with. And so just making sure they know some of the regulations related to turtles. Tracking confiscations. It's not always easy to get a good handle on what's going on because it's just hard to track these cases. And of course, what's showing up, what's confiscated is just part of what's actually out there, right, happening. And then managing confiscations. It's a lot of work when you take in 800 turtles all of a sudden. What do you do with all those turtles? They're often in very poor health. Where do you put them? Where do you house them? Veterinary care. So just trying to come up with protocols and a framework to be able to deal with that. Potential for repatriation. So this is something that people are starting to work on. And data sensitivity. When you're on Facebook, think twice about, giving really specific information about where you found this turtle. County is fine, but poachers use that information sometimes. They use information that's available out there either through literature or, in social media, places like that. And then just outreach, just trying to spread the word like I'm doing today. Okay, and then thinking about reducing threats within the focal core areas. What do we do? Land protection, obviously, trying to reduce or minimize the number of roads that go in. Agriculture, trying to, minimize the impacts of agriculture and recreation. Succession, so what I mean by that is like natural succession. So again, these open canopy nesting habitats are very important. So trying to make sure those areas stay open instead of succeeding to forest. And then just, thinking about our land management practices and how we go about them. Tracking database. All right. And I think I'm at my time. So maybe I will skip to the end here. I have a lot more. Wasn't sure how long it would take. So we have a population monitoring program we started up, and I was going to talk a bit about that, but and then how we process the turtles, and then there's a bunch of best management practices. So for example, with prescribed fire, we recommend restricting these activities to the inactive season. So when turtles are underground, use of single front fires. So instead of doing a circle that comes inward, giving them some route to hopefully escape if they can, if you use the single front fire, burning in smaller rotations. So you get the idea, just trying to come up with these ways that we can minimize mortalities of eastern box turtles. And we did the same for timber harvesting, mowing. So all these resources are available, expanding and improving nesting habitat, some information about illegal collection. Let me just go back a sec. And we have this all in a pamphlet, and I'll give you this website address again, but yeah, there's a nice pamphlet you could download, print, where, it goes over some of the recommendations for each of these practices. If you know any land management managers or, have a large property of your own. And then just some tips on how maybe you can help. So watching for turtles on the road, especially in June. So, mid to late May through early July, they're out moving around to nest. So it's often females. Not taking the turtles home or transplanting them somewhere else. We already went over that. Don't release pet store turtles because they can have diseases that the wild turtles have not been introduced to. Consider creating nesting habitat if you have a large enough property. Be careful where you're driving your ATVs and when. Don't leave food out that helps feed the raccoon population. So the population increases, and then there are more predators out there feeding on the turtle eggs. And then I just wanted to leave you with a couple resources, and I can put these links into the chat box. I'll do that.
Yes, that would be great. Thank you, Lori. That was all wonderful information.
Yeah, sorry for the squiggles. I don't know how that happened.
That's okay. We do have a few questions here in the chat if you'd like to try to answer them. The first question is from SJ, and they asked, did anyone follow the box turtles that were moved due to the construction of RT 200?
Yes. Yeah, Route 200, so the ICC.
Okay.
Yes. So Rich Siegel and Scott Farnsworth at Towson University they were monitoring the population in that area right before the ICC went in. And they moved turtles that were within the work zone, moved them out of the area. They actually that population experienced an outbreak of ranavirus.
Okay.
So yeah, that wasn't good. But we've been back in there this last year we're doing some disease screening. We haven't gotten the sample results back yet, but we're collecting samples to see how that population's doing now, like, what is it, 20 years later. There's still a lot of individuals there. We don't know if there are a lot of carriers of ranavirus that have survived or exactly what's going on yet, but we're interested in it and looking.
Nice. I also posted a couple questions. The first one is, how do you tell the difference between a male and female, and how old are they when you can make that determination?
So male and female, a little bit tricky with the eastern box turtle, but I typically go on 3 different characteristics. And so one of them is the eye color. So the females typically have brown eyes. The males have red eyes. It's not 100%. And so then you look at the plastron and how concave is it? Females are typically fairly smooth, flat. You can think of that as like allowing more room for the eggs, development of those eggs. And the males get up on top of the females when they mate. So the males have a very concave plastron.
Okay.
And then the third thing I would look at is if you can get the tail, if the tail is out, it'll be a much larger tail with the males, and the cloacal opening will be well outside the rim of the shell, whereas the females will have a very small tail and the cloacal opening is within the rim of the shell.
Okay.
And I look at all 3 of those. Usually the tail is the most telling, but it's also the most difficult to get sometimes.
And that's kind of the same for snakes, I heard. The longer tails are female. So that's very interesting.
Yes, that's true.
I heard that dogs are used to track box turtles in some studies. Is this method effective?
Yes, yep, it can be. Yes, it's been used a variety of locations now. It they can be very effective as long as there's enough moisture in the air for the scent to carry. And, when it's very dry, when you have very dry periods, the turtles also aren't moving. So they're not leaving a scent trail. So there are some times where they don't do, it's the dogs don't do any better for sure than us and maybe worse. Um, so it depends on the conditions, but they definitely could be very helpful at times.
Okay, very good to know. Lisa had a question. She said, is the new Southern Maryland refuge expansion plan going to help the turtle populations?
Hmm. Do you know much about the
I do not. Um, if you have any more information on that, Lisa, we'd love to know. We can always look into it. Which brought me back to if you would like to post a link to any of your pages or emails onto the chat, Lori.
Yeah,
Be
sorry, I
great.
was
And then
trying to.
people can email you with more questions if they come up with something later on.
Okay, so this is.
Lori was, or Lisa was also asking if you could make those two brochure links active in the chat.
Okay, so I posted. Oh, did that work? Yeah, okay. So the first link. Sorry, the links are similar. Northeastturtles.org. I think I'm gonna pull up the link again. I'm not sure it copied correctly. Let's see. ATO. Turtle. Okay. Yeah, this one's right. Okay, so this is. Sorry, I'm not as fast as some of you millennials.
That's okay.
Here we go.
While we're posting that, Jessica asked, what adhesive do you guys use to attach the trackers on their shells?
Um, so what bioacrylic? It's Biomark. I think it's Biomark. Is that right? I could get that information to her. Yeah, I'm blanking on the exact. I actually have one. Oh, right. Yeah, right. So it's Great Lakes. They mainly deal with dentists, so um I'm not sure if they still sell to individuals, but that's who I had been getting them from. And it's a kit, it's a bioacrylic resin kit.
Okay.
I prefer it just because it pops off without damaging the shell a little better than the epoxy, especially if you're just tracking them for like a season or a year.
Yeah.
So I put two links in the chat box. The first one is for the Northeast turtles, Eastern box turtle status. Is that okay? So both links are the same. All right, so let me get to the second one. All right, so those two links get you to the status assessment, the conservation plan, and the outreach materials. So that pamphlet that I showed and some other information. And then this next link gets you to it's called the Northeast Partners in Amphibian and Reptile Conservation website. And they're a really good group in the Northeast. Anybody that's interested in amphibian reptile conservation can be a member and get involved. And anyway, there's a turtle working group as part of that organization. And that turtle working group has been very active in producing all kinds of educational materials about freshwater turtles. And so that link will take you to some of those materials.
Nice. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Catherine asked if we could please spell the name of the virus that is lethal to the turtles, and I think Lisa answered this for us. It is ranavirus, which is RANA space virus. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I just posted it in the chat box.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yes.
So it looks like that's all the questions we have right now.
Okay.
If you have any more, you're welcome to post them in the chat and we can answer them. Perfect. Well, don't forget, we have another seminar on March 9th. And if you can't catch that one, we have one actually closer to on February 9th. So we have 2 more left of the winter seminar series. And again, I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. Thank you for being respectful and listening to Lori's presentation. There's a lot of good information presented tonight. Hope you guys learned a lot. And I just want to thank you, Lori, again for coming out. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you again to everyone for taking the time.
Perfect. Well, you guys have a good night, and we'll see you hopefully at the next seminar.